And it's a great pleasure and honor to be here, and I hope to meet all of you as the day proceeds. As we were just told, my colleague Michelle and I will say a bit about CEI as a whole, mainly from the global perspective. And I will start by perhaps explaining why we have created this. And Michelle will then explain a bit about how we anticipate that it does and will operate. So first of all, why? Well, globally speaking, there are two important phenomena, at least two important phenomena, that are kind of behind this. The first is that whatever sort of measures you want to use, Millennium Development Goals or Education for All goals or national education goals, the world is off track. The idea that every child would be in primary school and learning by 2015, that is not going to happen. Something like 57 million, latest official number of children around the world, primary school age, who are not in primary school. Something like 700 million actually are in primary school. And by all the various measures of those who are in school, there's clearly, and we see this in India with the ASA and other reports, clearly a problem of actual learning occurring. So first of all, there's a pretty serious situation then in education. Second phenomenon is the huge expansion globally, and certainly India is part of that, very much part of that, of non-state education. Something like 14% of all primary school children in the world are in private or non-state schools. Something like 22% of all secondary children are in non-state schools. Now, of course, these include private schools for the elite. In all countries, very rich buy private education for their children. But the growth phenomenon has been the attendance of poorer children at non-state schools. And we see that here. You see that here in India. I was told that here in Bangalore itself, something like 80% of the children are actually primary children are going to private schools. Hyderabad, something like 70%. In Nigeria, the country which we think has the largest number of children out of school, maybe they don't, because survey was recent. We used to think that something like 30% of Nigerian children were not in school. But a survey recently carried out in Lagos State, the state around the capital of Lagos, we discovered that actually it's only 3% who are not in school. And the difference is that all those children who people thought were not in school actually are in school. They're in non-state schools, private schools. That may be an extreme example, but it's a pretty interesting one. So we've got these two phenomena then. Big global education challenges and huge growth of non-state education. And these are linked, because a lot of the growth of non-state education is in reaction to the poor quality of state or public education in many countries. Quality perceived in many different ways, but basically in reaction to that. So we have this phenomenon of the huge growth of non-state education, and let me just take a second to sort of define that a bit more precisely. So we're using, it's an unfortunate term, one would like a more positive term, who wants a term that begins non, but nonetheless, that is probably the best descriptive word to use, because we want to encompass all sorts of organizations, precisely like those of you who are here today, NGOs, religiously affiliated education providers, for-profit education providers, and so on. And very importantly, also, I think there's a very important phenomenon everywhere of actually sort of combinations of non-state and state. You find many non-state programs operating in public systems also. So we want to take that very broad view of things. So we know that there is this kind of phenomena of this rapid expansion of this sector, if we call it that, around the world. And especially in South Asia, and not just India, Pakistan, a huge expansion. And also in Africa, I mentioned Nigeria, Ghana, something like 1/3 of all the children go to non-state schools. So we know that in a sort of statistical sense. But it turns out that we don't really know, none of us know a whole lot about this sector as a whole. And there's this kind of lack of information available there. And so part of the objective of setting up this Center for Education Innovations is to bring together information about non-state education. And we were asked to do this by DFID, the UK aid agency, because we have done a similar thing, actually for health. Some of you may be familiar with that, something called the Center for Health Market Innovations. If you're interested, you can look that up. And that's been running about 2 or 3 years ahead of this education one. Our purpose then is to make information available, to connect up people working in the non-state sector, such as yourselves, to connect you with each other, but also to connect you with other interested parties, with other sort of stakeholders in the whole non-state system. So we anticipate there are really 4 sort of user groups, if we could call them that, people mainly like you who are actually running programs, policymakers, very important, with this rapid growth of non-state education. The government has to think a lot more about how to regulate it. And of course, that's a pretty interesting issue here in India. But more generally, there's a lot of thought going into that now. Funders, there are many who want to fund non-state education, and also, of course, researchers. So these are the 4 sort of groups that we see as the target audience for this center. I think it's important to point out also that we shouldn't see, even if part of the growth of the non-state sector has been in reaction to perceived inadequacies of the state sector, we nonetheless shouldn't see these as in conflict. That one of the important things that can be done in the non-state sector, and we see it very much just walking around with those banners outside with those display things, or your programs, is that it's a lot easier to get innovations, and hence the title, Center for Education Innovations, in the non-state sector, because you're less constrained. But many of those innovations can actually be applied in the state sector. So it's another important reason for the interest in non-state education is that that's where the new ideas and the effective programs are coming from. So all of this is really what's behind the setting up of the Center for Education Innovations. The objective is that it will ultimately be a global coverage. Initially, as you may or may not have seen if you've been to the website already, there's a focus on a relatively smaller number of countries, but India being one of the most significant. Initially also, it's been somewhat designed according to what we think you want, partly by asking people like you, partly by kind of estimating what we think you would find useful. But we may not have got that completely right, and so I want to, in my sort of, before I hand over to Michelle, I want to deliver a very strong message that this is not our centre. We happen to have been the people who put it together, but this is your centre. And all of you, in fact all of you in those 4 categories that I mentioned, and we want this to be what you want. So it is yours, and it can be changed and adapted to meet your needs. So that could be to meet your needs specifically here within India. It could be to meet your needs because you're working on secondary education for disabled children, and you'd like to find out more about others who are doing that, in Brazil or Kenya or somewhere. It could be for various reasons. But the point I want to make is, and I want to stress, is that this is for you, this will be yours, this is yours, and it can be adapted to meet your needs. So I'll stop there and I'll ask Michelle to just say a bit about how the actual website and works and other activities that we anticipate will be part of this centre and its related activities.